Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host today, Dr. W.F. Strong, and we have first a little business. We want to thank audiobooks.com for underwriting this program and making it possible. Also would like to remind you that you can always get this program on our Facebook page as a download and as a kind of podcast at Good Books Radio on Facebook. And you can also get it on our YouTube channel, Good Books Radio, where you can listen to it again. And we upload all the information about the book. Our book today is American Sanctuary, Mutiny, Martyrdom, and National Identity in the Age of Revolution by A. Roger Ekirch. He's with us today. We're going to talk to him in just a minute. A fabulous book, a great look at a remarkable period in American history that had a lot to do with defining who we are today. And so we're going to talk to him about a great number of issues, but it starts with this mutiny that many people probably never heard of. At least I had been aware of it, but I didn't know how important it was. Roger, welcome. How are you today?
Just fine, Bill. Thanks loads for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I wanted to begin with, Mutiny on the Bounty is one that everybody knows about. And as you've written in this book about this particular mutiny, it was more violent and bloody and difficult and had a longer impact, I would say, in terms of both British and American history. So why don't we know of this?
Excellent question. You're completely correct. Mutiny on the Bounty occurred 8 years earlier. It was comparatively non-violent. The captain, Bligh, though subsequently vilified, actually, according to the latest studies, was just the opposite. He was certainly heroic in being put aboard with some 15 other crew members and in a small launch and making their way literally thousands of miles to safety. I had not heard of the, as you say, the most violent mutiny in the history of the Royal Navy, the Hermione. I had not heard of it, period, up until about 10 years ago. Came across it by accident. It intrigued me, but even then, I did not begin to appreciate the impact that it had, both in Britain, but especially, ironically enough, in the United States. What's the reason for our ignorance? Well, in Britain, where it is better known, I will say, it nonetheless remains a source of embarrassment for the Royal Navy. And so it's certainly not something that they have, over the years, sought to celebrate.
Publicize, yes. Can you tell us the basic story for everybody there, like me, who, I was unfamiliar until I came across your book. What happened in that mutiny?
In 1797, September, in the dead of night, a complement of about 170 seamen aboard the HMS Hermione, a 32-gun British frigate. A number of them, a small portion actually, hatched a conspiracy to overthrow their captain, kill him, and as one put it, we might as well be hung for killing a lamb as for a sheep. And hence they dispatched by slashing to death with sabers, bayonets, crushing their skulls with tomahawks, and 9 other officers as well, all of whom are thrown overboard into the Caribbean in the dead of night, just west of the western coast of Puerto Rico. Piggott, the captain, while serving in the Royal Navy, was certainly very taxing, to say the least, and a high source of mortality, owing primarily, at least in the Caribbean, to yellow fever and malaria. Nonetheless, despite that, and despite the fact that revolutionary sentiment was in the air, owing primarily to the French Revolution occurring or beginning years earlier, nonetheless, Piggott was singularly sadistic. He was unpredictable, which only made matters worse because there was no way of modifying your behavior. Either as an officer, they were intimidated, or as a naval seaman, modifying your behavior to cope with his.
So they killed these. They killed the captain and the 9 officers, and then. So what happened next?
They abandoned the ship in Venezuela on the Spanish Main, which at that time Spain had become an ally of France and was engaged in a war with Great Britain. So on top of being mutineers, pirates, they were also guilty of treason. They spend a couple months there, anxious to leave. They eventually scatter across the far shores of the North Atlantic with a number, uncertain number, but certainly a good minority washing up in the United States.
Okay.
One of whom goes by the name Jonathan Robbins, and that's where really the major part of the story commences, with his arrest.
Now, was that his real name or the name that he was going by? Was that his birth name?
Well, that's what he claimed, Bill. The British claimed, rather than being an American citizen born in Danbury, Connecticut, as he also claimed, that in truth he was the most notorious ringleader in the mutiny, an Irishman from Waterford named Thomas Nash. And if you permit me, this is a mystery that no one really has ever resolved, but I flatter myself with the benefit, not of any superior insight, but with the benefit of new sources to having laid to rest. But I would rather let the book resolve that mystery for itself.
Okay. Well, you laid that out very carefully, so it's better to read it and follow the line of logic. What I do really want to focus on here, I mean, the mutiny is quite fascinating, and you write about it in a way that's like a good novel. But to me, the real meat is that which has resonance with kind of today, because it deals with, your book deals with immigration and immigration policy and what it means to be an American and all that sort of thing.
Sure.
So if we could deal with that part, the British government wanted to extradite him. And so what happened?
Well, they appealed to a federal judge in Charleston, South Carolina, where he lay in jail for months on end. after the British consul there had identified him as a mutineer, whereupon the federal judge originally declares that he cannot be extradited by virtue of a treaty, that the Jay Treaty of 1794 that the United States and Britain had signed.
And what did that treaty say?
It said that that for two offenses, murder and forgery, British citizens in the United States who had fled to the United States, and vice versa, any Americans who had fled to Great Britain, could be extradited to the other country if they had committed their original crime of murder or forgery in the case of Robbins, in British territory.
Okay.
So the issue that the federal judge hesitated to resolve by himself is whether a ship at sea qualified as British territory.
Does it today?
It does.
Hmm.
Yes. But at that point, it was hotly contested, and it was quite hypocritical of the British to take this stance insofar as they had absolutely no hesitation in boarding American ships to impress seamen whom they claimed were British deserters, some of whom definitely were, but not all were. But the fact of the matter is they boarded the sovereign territory by their own definition of the United States.
Well, and it was also it was also very much a British policy they got their sailors they just kind of kidnapped them, right? From sometimes.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
From bars and stuff.
And many luminaries throughout British history said that this is probably unconstitutional.
Oh, I would imagine.
But that ultimately it's a matter of national security.
Wow.
George II deplored this, but by then the monarch's wings had been clipped, and in Britain, and so it was a matter of national security insofar as there was no way that Britain could sustain its own naval supremacy as an island nation, which was absolutely crucial to its survival, to prevent foreign invasion by sea, the only available route at that point. They defended this as being absolutely critical to their survival, and with large numbers of British seamen deserting or volunteering, whether they're deserters or not, to serve in foreign navies. That was their defense of impressment and going so far as boarding foreign ships, many of them belonging to the United States.
I understand that this is an aside, and we got to get back to our main story. But I understand that the lives these sailors led were just horrific. That died of scurvy. I mean, just a horrible, horrible existence.
Yes.
I mean, unless you're an officer.
During the American Revolution, thousands of British seamen in the Royal Navy deserted in the Revolutionary War to the United States.
Well, let's go back to our hero here, so to speak, or the focus of our story, Jonathan Robbins. He got extradited, and then what happened to him?
He's extradited after John Adams involves himself in response to British pleas. Adams makes what I argue is the most catastrophic single decision of his presidency. He had no right to be involved, given separation of powers. It was up to the federal judge, even if he didn't want the responsibility, in Charleston, South Carolina. But he sanctions the extradition. The British take Jonathan Robbins to their colony of Jamaica, Kingston. He's given a court-martial, and 3 days later hung from the yardarm of a British warship. Doesn't end there, because as with other mutineers and pirates, his moldering remains are hung in chains indefinitely on an island leading to the harbor of Kingston.
Wow.
As a deterrent to other malefactors. This, his extradition, is publicized in the United States, and his execution, the combination creates a firestorm, especially among opponents of Adams and followers of Thomas Jefferson. They criticize Adams on any number of levels, including the fact that he had no right to violate separation of powers, but emotionally more important to members of the emergent Republican Party is that Robbins had claimed to be an American, and whether or not he was an American or not. And this kind of applies directly today to foreign aliens. Followers of Jefferson insisted that he nonetheless was entitled, under the Constitution, be he a citizen or not, to due process, including, most importantly, the right to trial by jury, which he was not afforded.
And this cost...
What complicates...
I was going to say, this cost Adams his election, right? Jefferson won, as you argue that Jefferson won because of this?
There are many components of his defeat. Certainly the Alien and Sedition Acts. But in a razor-thin what was a razor-thin election in the Electoral College, by which Adams was defeated by Jefferson, this was, I argue, the single most divisive issue. And I flatter myself that there's very strong evidence for that. If you look at the state level, where electors were in fact designated to give their votes eventually in the Electoral College, it was the cause of Jonathan Robbins, who, in addition to claiming to have been an American, what gave this added resonance, his martyrdom, was that he was a freedom fighter against British tyranny, with the issue of impressment center stage, far and away the most important then straining relations between the United States and Great Britain, which would ultimately, more than any other single issue, lead to the War of 1812. So yes, it had a major impact upon what's been, I think, rightly called the most important presidential election in United States history up until that of Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War.
Well, in this one, you might, I imagine that essentially Adams was just called un-American, right?
Yes. He was called a stooge of Great Britain, an aristocrat. Whereas Jefferson was called an atheist and an anarchist.
So we see that our modern politics have no...
I might add, calls from both political parties to lock them up. Both of them. Both of them.
So I was going to say that our modern politics have no edge in dirtiness on those of long ago, right?
No. If I wanted to be... I'm not going to claim that our modern politics have improved in light of November's election, but the good news is we survived 1800, and so I think regardless of where people fall politically, I think we'll be okay.
Well, one thing I'd like to touch on, actually the last question I have time for, but you have this wonderful phrase in here in the book that I found somehow deeply patriotic, I think, and it's this idea that America is, quote, an asylum for mankind. Could you speak to that?
Yes. Let me begin by saying that I did not coin it. It was, as you know, famously voiced by Tom Paine in Common Sense in 1776 that gave the American Revolution for large numbers of Americans as well as founding fathers an added moral purpose to declaring national independence from Great Britain. That being that America, as a beacon of liberty, would forever afford a sanctuary, or in Paine's words, an asylum for mankind, with particular priority to be given to fugitives fleeing foreign tyrannies for political reasons. Mm-hmm. The Robbins affair, in my view, apart from helping to turn the election of 1800, apart from helping to redefine American citizenship as being based more fundamentally upon political convictions and adherence to democratic republicanism as opposed to where one was born, the most important legacy, in my view, was that the Robbins affair led directly to America's adoption of political asylum, thereby fulfilling Tom Paine's iconic pledge, despite the 1790s overflowing with nativism, cresting ultimately under the Federalists and the Alien and Sedition Acts. Mm-hmm. After Robbins was extradited and news of his execution rendered him a martyr, for 43 years, not one person, an American citizen or a foreign alien, would be surrendered up by the United States to a foreign power.
Wow.
And the reason was the extremely bitter taste that the Robbins controversy left in the mouths of most Americans and their leaders. It had an extraordinarily long shelf life, to the extent that John Adams would be haunted to his death by this, among other decisions that he made.
Roger, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Bill. I'm very grateful, and have a wonderful day.
Okay, you too. Good luck with the book. We've been talking with Roger Ekirch, author of American Sanctuary, Mutiny, Martyrdom, and National Identity in the Age of Revolution. It's a wonderful, brilliant book, highly praised by many fine sources. Publishers Weekly says that Ekirch builds a strong case that the politics informing this controversy were instrumental in the historical refusals of the U.S. to extradite aliens charged solely with political crimes. Also, I like this one from Paul Gilgee, who's written The Liberty on the Waterfront. He says that this book is packed with drama. Ekirch tells this story with rich and powerful prose, demonstrating how this saga of the mutiny on the Hermione helped Americans develop their national identity during the early Republic. And finally, I'll share this one with you by Peter S. Onoff, who wrote The Mind of Thomas Jefferson. He said, "One of the most important and enjoyable books I have read in many years." Now, that's high praise indeed. "An extraordinary journey. Ekirch's gripping narrative brings a largely forgotten episode to life, illuminating its immediate impact on party politics in a polarized revolutionary age and on the new nation's enduring identity as an asylum of liberty. Ekirch's brilliant reconstruction is a triumph of historical research and analysis." And I found that I agreed with this. Really, really a wonderful historical book that reads like a novel. So you'll want to get it. For Good Books Radio, I'm your host today, Dr. W.F. Strong, signing off, saying here's hoping that all your books are good reads.